So it's released Wave 2 of the Imperial Guard with a fair few boxes including the Combat Patrol and Rough Riders. Let's talk prices and how much Games Workshop increases are going to bite into this. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking through Games Workshop's news and releases, including really quite a lot of new Guard stuff, plus the Space Marine character Captain Messinius. A few weeks ago we basically had the vast majority of the Guard kits released, things like the Rogol Dawn, the Cadian Shock Troops and Infantry, and a bunch of other stuff. These look to be the kits that are rounding out the release though. We've got Combat Patrol Astra Militarum, the Rough Riders, the Cadian Castellan and new Commissar, the Cadian upgrades and the Aegis defense line, and Captain Messinius as well for the White Consul Space Marines. These guys are going to be going up for pre-order on the Games Workshop web store and independent stockists on the 18th of February. General sale looks like it's going to be on the 25th of February. And these releases are the first official confirmation of Games Workshop price hikes, both in terms of pounds and euros. We had already got quite a lot of details for the US and Canadian dollars as we talked about in a recent video on the channel. Let's talk through the kits, some of the pros and cons of them, and how much they're going to cost. First up, let's start with perhaps the most interesting release in my opinion, which is Combat Patrol Astra Militarum. This one's £95, €125 or 160 US dollars, basically plus £5 or €5 from what it was before, or plus $10. So I guess in general, in terms of relative savings, the Combat Patrol kits might just be a little bit better in the UK or Europe. Not a major amount of difference in it, to be honest. They'll still give a decent saving on Games Workshop's kits regardless, but obviously everything has gone up, including these things. The Guard Combat Patrol box set is basically the same miniatures as the Cadia Stands box, so if you missed out on that, then the miniatures are here. Here we've got the Cadian Command Squad, 20 Cadian Shock Troops, the Sentinel that you can build as either a scout or armoured version, and the two new Field Ordnance Batteries, so one 130-point unit of those. Overall, in terms of unit mix, I don't think it's the worst start to getting a Guard army off the ground. You likely are going to want some orders and some infantry. Sentinels are generally good, and the Field Ordnance Batteries are usable enough. I'd be tempted by their ignores line of sight firepower with the big guns. In terms of whether or not it's a good deal or not though, it is a bit of a contradiction. In terms of pricing compared with Games Workshop's kits separately, it is around about 40% off these miniatures if you buy them separately from Games Workshop. Admittedly that is a bit of an estimate given we don't know exactly how much their prices are increasing, but it looks like it'll shake out around about that level. Overall, in terms of discounts from Games Workshop, that's actually fairly good. Combat Patrol box sets are often between 30 and 35% discount, so it's not too bad. However though, Guard as an army are just very expensive to collect in general. In terms of the actual points of miniatures that you get in the box, it's pretty low compared with a lot of Combat Patrol box sets, only around about 385 points in this. That's a 2.4 points per dollar ratio, and pretty low just in general for 40k, never mind a Combat Patrol discount set. Arguably that's a bit more of a Guard problem than a general 40k problem. Their units do tend to be quite cheap, and recent sculpts of any sort from Games Workshop tend to be quite expensive. Overall, I think it's a useful enough force to start a Guard army or add a few reinforcement units to one if you want them. It still doesn't really change the fact that Guard are an expensive army to collect in general. One of the other units that Guard players have been waiting for a while are the new Rough Riders. These are going to be £37.50, €50 or $60. They look to be kind of similar to things like standard Space Marine Intercessors. Pricing wise, these are pretty much as I would have predicted, to be honest. As with most Guard things, they are pretty expensive for the amount of points that you get on the board, but I guess they've done at least a little bit better than some other cavalry models, say for example those crazily expensive Admech Cerberus cavalry, where you only get 3 of them in the box for a kind of similar price. In game I'd rate Rough Riders as pretty nice for a powerful countercharge option, definitely usable in strong lists, though I wouldn't take them in large numbers, maybe just 1 or 2 units to hide safe and then jump out and countercharge the enemy when they get close. Their damage output for the points is absolutely spectacular, but they're not really all that hard to kill if they do get exposed, and will generally die quite quickly to most things. In terms of the models, I think that people were maybe a little bit split on these guys. Some people really quite like the way that they hark back to the old Attilan Rough Rider miniatures. With the armoured horses and the flowing robes, they do kind of feel like knights in space. Some people really like their aesthetic, but other people might have preferred something a bit more militaristic looking, and perhaps being a bit more akin to Cadians or just more generic Imperial Guardsmen. Modelling wise, Games Workshop has shown off the sprues for the Rough Riders today. You can see a fair few details that you get here. A few different modelling options and a couple of different ways that you can assemble the Sergeant. Perhaps one of the biggest things that you can do aesthetically is arm the lances with the frag or melter tips, though it doesn't make any difference in game as you can use both of them. In any case, pretty nice to have the last major addition to the book playable. It has been a bit of an annoying interim where things like the Rogue Dawn and the Rough Riders were out in the rules but not released, so a lot of places you couldn't really use them. Moving on, we've got a couple of guard characters, the Cadian Castellan and the new Commissar miniature. Both of these are £21, €27 and $35, and they are sold individually. You don't get both in a kit or anything. The Cadian Castellan I think is quite nice to have the option as just a flexible senior officer that you can add to the forces. Not really doing anything enormously revolutionary in terms of the miniature himself, but you do get a fair few options in it, a few different head swaps, and actually a fairly amount of generous war gear. You can give him things like bolt pistols, plasma pistols, power swords, or power fists. There's a fair bit of customization. In-game is solid enough, being the most efficient orders for the points with 2 of them, though kind of weirdly with the Forge World Imperial Armor update, it does look like they've actually made the Deathcore Marshal basically a better version of him. Largely does the same stuff, but only costs 35 points, so I guess you could potentially run him with those rules temporarily if you wanted. Overall, I think it's quite a helpful kit to have in the range. I'm sure some people will pick him up, though I feel like for quite a lot of guard players you might have a fair few officer models kicking around anyway. You could probably convert something pretty appropriate rather than having to buy quite an expensive kit. I do feel that the price of these guys are pretty expensive for single guard infantry models, kind of in line with Games Workshop's pricing structure for characters, but still pretty crazy considering how much plastic you actually get for your money. The Commissar, on the other hand, I think divided opinions a bit more in the guard range. A fair few people consider him to be one of the weakest looking miniatures out of the new model range. Perhaps just a bit more of a passive pose, and a bit less dynamic than a few of the Commissar miniatures they've released in the past. When they showed off that store anniversary Commissar, the reaction of quite a few people was why didn't they have this as the standard one? It looks like the miniature does have the option to choose between a chainsword or power sword depending on how you'd like to equip him. And just in general for obtaining Commissars, I would bear in mind that there's likely quite a lot of those plasma pistol armed Commissars going cheap on eBay. They've been discounted in the Old Guard Start Collecting box and the Scion Start Collecting box for quite a long time now. In game, I think they're useful enough to include in a guard army with some infantry. The orders are very flexible and quite good in the right situation, either things like denying deep strike or granting objective secured or something, or getting to fall back and shoot. Perhaps not as universally amazing as the standard regimental ones with direct damage and movement increases, but in the right situation they can be really big. Next up we've got this Cadian upgrade sprue, £21, €27 and $35. This was the one that was surprisingly turned up on eBay, and that was the way it got leaked out that it was coming. This one's basically the same cost as the price of the characters. I'd say as upgrade sprues go it's maybe not too bad, though perhaps doesn't do anything particularly revolutionary. Some of the interesting features are a whole bunch of different head swaps. A fair few of them have some fun gas mask rebreather type things. There's a few combat knives, some sandbags, a fair few trades for different lasguns slung across shoulders and things, and an interesting option for the autogun that Cadian sergeants can carry with a belt-fed autogun. Perhaps one of the other interesting things though is they get a unique tank commander that's kind of reminiscent of Knight Commander Pask. They suggested that you could use him as a tank commander for a Rogue Dawn if you've given him that tank case upgrade. Overall, I suspect for the price this one might be a little bit on the niche side. I feel like some people do really love these little aesthetic details that they can add onto their miniatures, but for a fair few others they might just be better off getting more miniatures. Definitely some fun details here, kind of nice for those who want them. Lastly, for the guard releases, we've got a very expensive wall. The new Aegis Defense Line kit is a plastic kit to replace the old generic one. I think looks-wise it does its job as an Imperial bit of fortification. One of the panels got breached, there's a fair bit of battle damage, and each panel is in the shape of an Aquila. But honestly, I was expecting the price to be significantly less than this. £45, €60, or around $75 does seem extortionate for just one bit of wall. I just can't see many people being tempted to pick it up at that cost. Furthermore, in-game, its rules are kind of okay but do have issues. It gets the fortification deployment problems where it can't set up too close to other bits of terrain, meaning that you might not be able to put it down very well. Plus there's problems with its keywords as well. For some reason they decided not to count it as a barricade and instead count it as area terrain, despite the fact that besides the little bunker type thing it doesn't really have any area that you can deploy your miniatures into. So the vast majority of the wall just doesn't really do anything for your troops in terms of fortification purposes. I think it could do with a rules fix, could be helpful whenever Games Workshop actually get round to doing the FAQ document for the core Guard Codex. That's it for Guard, but this week we also have Captain Messinius of the White Consuls come out. He's £24, €31.50 or $40 US, and this seems to be the new Games Workshop price for a bunch of more standard characters. Like the Guard infantry models, I do still find it pretty horribly expensive for a single infantry model, though in general the sculpt for this guy has gone down fairly well. I'm sure that'll interest at least a few people as a luxury buy. This guy's basically being released as a Black Library Celebration miniature, a character from their Dawn of Fire series, who featured in previous books, though his miniature happens to be a Primaris miniature when he wasn't in the story. I guess that hints at future narrative, I suppose. In general, I think he's just a fairly nicely executed Space Marine captain. He's got a snazzy relic power fist from Gilliman with some gold inlay. His plasma pistol looks rather nice as well, and it's got a little bit of chapter-specific iconography for the White Consuls as well. Supposedly he's one of the last surviving members of that chapter, unless they managed to find any others. Otherwise he does have a head swap, but I feel like this laurel-wreathed helm is probably the better looking of the two. And in game I guess you just filled him as a standard Space Marine captain with power fist and plasma pistol, though he may get something like either a Legends datasheet or a full-on proper 40k datasheet. After all, Uriel Ventris of the Ultramarines did get a proper datasheet for him. Games Workshop did release a little bit of digital content for him today, one themed mission around defending the Gates of Terror. I did wonder whether they might show off some fun rules for him at the same time, but it seems that's not the case. I'll certainly cover his rules on the channel though, if Games Workshop do get round to releasing some. So anyway, it's nice to finally have the second half of the Imperial Guard. Broadly priced is kind of in line with what I would have expected. The pricing on the Aegis defense line does look particularly disappointing though. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. If you are looking to pick up any 40k, whether it's this or anything else, I would just like to quickly mention my Element Games affiliate link, which you can find down in the video description. If you live in the UK, Element Games generally does 15% off the vast majority of Games Workshop's products. If you did click on the link and buy anything through it, then a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics and doesn't cost you any more whatsoever if you order something. Can just be a way to help out the channel on things that you would have bought anyway. It does help these videos keep on coming. Otherwise, for people over in the USA, there is also an Amazon link down there as well. That works very similarly too. Click the link, literally buy whatever, Warhammer or not, and a small amount goes to help support the channel. Again, can be basically free if you were going to pick up something anyway. A massive thank you to you guys who have been helping out that way. In any case though, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.